And the man who needs no introduction, Don McLaughlin, if you'll lead us off for today.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Diane Haynes and I are very pleased indeed to welcome you to this final session of the ILR class, Meet the Composer. Over the past 6 weeks, we've had a special opportunity to meet 6 gifted artist teachers from the U.S. School of Music and to learn about the creative processes they follow in developing their composition. Most importantly, we've had an opportunity and the pleasure of hearing their composition. Our first presenter, Dr. Paul Richards, who is a Research Foundation Professor of Music and head of the Composition and Theory area in the School of Music, is with us again today to provide a special, I call it coda, to this wonderful class. You may recall that Paul's compositions, ranging from numerous orchestral, vocal, chamber, and theatrical work to 3 full-length operas, have been heard in performances throughout the country and internationally on 6 continents. Just 3 weeks ago, Paul's new symphony, number 3, the Symphony of Cells, received its world premiere performance by the Ocala Symphony Orchestra. Today, Paul is going to give us a behind-the-scenes look at his most recent opera, The Golem of Prague. I've also asked him to provide a kind of summary of the different styles of musical composition we have heard over the past 6 weeks, and what he thinks this creative art form is likely to be in the future. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Paul Richards.
Thank you very much, Don. It's lovely to be back. Thank you for the return invitation, and thank you for your interest in contemporary music. Sometimes we feel like we're operating in a sort of strange little vacuum or something as creative artists. Composition is a fairly lonely activity, and to get out, as I expect you've noticed, composers love talking about themselves. The opportunity to do this has been great. What I wanted to do today, I do want to speak about my opera, and that's what I've planned, but I wanted to let this be a little more open because I understand that various kinds of questions have emerged. So please feel free to jump in with questions in the chat or just to speak up as we go. And I will certainly leave some time towards the end for any discussion around the opera that I'm presenting, but also these sort of more global issues about the profession now that you've had a chance to see my colleagues' work. Since Don mentioned it, I thought I'd start with a kind of diversion. My third symphony was just premiered by the Ocala Symphony, and since this is a local and kind of fresh thing, I wanted to share one movement of this 4-movement work with you. The piece was written for my colleague Raymond Shobaz, who has conducted the UF Symphony for 40 years, and he's retiring this year. There's a sort of bittersweet, that's a bittersweet moment in itself, but the circumstances surrounding the event were also bittersweet. I have not, in all of my experience, had a conductor take any work this seriously. Raymond I met him at his house. We talked through things. I played through things. He was studying the score. He was sending me notes. Very, very detailed notes about very specific moments. He really got into the piece. The day before our rehearsals, the way professional orchestras work is you rehearse basically the day before the concert. And the day before the rehearsals, Raymond contacted me. He is completely fine, but he came down with COVID and was unable to participate in the premiere. So what you're seeing here is the regular conductor of the Ocala Symphony, who is a current doctoral student of ours, Matthew Wardell, who I've known since he was a junior in school, or a freshman maybe. Matt had all of 24 hours to learn the whole program, to prepare it as a conductor, which included my piece, which obviously hadn't been heard before, and another large symphony by Carl Nielsen. So the piece is about, Raymond had always wanted a companion piece for Carl Nielsen's The Four Temperaments, which is a piece based on this idea that there are humors in the body that control our personality. I happened to hear an NPR story with a modern psychologist who proposed this theory that various hormone systems in the brain, and if there's chemists in the audience, I'm not saying this well, and my apologies, but various chemical systems in the brain contribute to certain personality types. And I took these descriptions of personality types, gave them to Raymond and said, what piece of music does this remind you of? And he came back with these wonderful suggestions. So the movement I'm going to play for you is based on the serotonin system, which is supposed to be the thing that makes us feel calm. It seems to be responsible perhaps for certain kind of religiosity, for communal good feeling, things like that. And Raymond's suggestion was this beautiful waltz from also from Carl Nielsen from a different symphony. So what I did is I took the music of that waltz, I quote it in the middle, but it also informs a lot of the piece. What you're going to hear at the beginning and the end of this movement is a kind of play on what in music we call the amen cadence. For those with some musical training, it's the subdominant chord resolving to the tonic. If that means nothing to you, it's okay. But the reason it's called the amen cadence is it's the chords that typically accompany the amen kind of ending of a piece. So let me go ahead and share this with you. So like I said, I'm excited about that. It just happened. Any questions or anything you'd like to know about that piece before I go into the opera? Right.
I just wanted to say that the entire symphony is wonderful.
Thank you.
Please, it's, and yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah. So let me tell you about this opera. I'll stop sharing for a second while I just talk about this. Many years ago, our opera director here, Tony Offerly, and I were having a conversation, and I had mentioned that, I've done, as I talked about several weeks ago, done a couple of operas that were what I guess we call chamber operas. They were full length, hour and a half, 2-hour affairs, but with a small orchestra, small group of cast members. I really wanted to do something sort of more on a grand scale. We have the resources that those who've been to our opera productions know that we're capable of doing fairly big kind of operatic productions, both classic things, but also we've done, we did a premiere of one of our alumni, Stella Sung, who's a rather well-known composer, now based in Orlando. So we were talking about this, and I pitched this idea of the opera based on the story of the Golem, which is a folktale from Jewish folklore, something that I'd been familiar with. I couldn't tell you when I first heard this story, but I have, there's a children's book, that a version of the story that I read to my kids frequently when they were little, which, when I tell you the story, is going to make me seem like maybe not the best parent, because it's kind of scary. But the story roughly, and it's told in various versions, but what we went with is it's set in late 16th century Prague, and the story is told in various folk legends, but became associated with a particular rabbi who was operating at that time, a real person, who is said to have some mystic abilities along with being a community leader. At the time, as has happened often in European Jewish history, there was the blood libel, the story that Jews were taking Christian children and taking their blood for ritual purposes. It's one of those anti-Semitic tropes that's followed Jewish people for many hundreds of years. And in this telling of the story, that idea gets rekindled. And as an act of self-protection initially, the rabbi first goes to the emperor, Rudolph, and says to him, "You need to protect my people." The emperor is not as willing to take strong action as the rabbi would like. So he decides to consult ancient Jewish texts, where there's this telling of a creature that can be brought to life made of clay. And he goes through this process, makes this creature out of clay, brings it to life with this clever device of inscribing the word truth in Hebrew on the creature's forehead. Initially, the creature comes to life and serves to protect people, stopping the spread of this rumor and violence against the community. But when a violent moment happens, the creature loses it, gets out of control. He becomes more and more enraged and goes on a rampage and destroys parts of the Christian village and maims and injures people himself. And the rabbi is forced to put the creature, to terminate the creature. Does so by erasing one of the Hebrew letters in his head, which turns the Hebrew word emet, meaning truth, into met, which means death. And the creature dies. In our telling, I inserted a character, the granddaughter of the rabbi, who's not in any of the legends, but we felt like we needed more substance to this. So this granddaughter befriends the golem early on and defends him throughout, and pleads for his life when the rabbi decides it's time to put him to death. At the very end of the opera, she is prepared to reinscribe his forehead and bring him back to life, or so it appears, but we don't know if she actually does. That's kind of the story in a nutshell. I'm going to share some scenes and maybe fill in some of the details. After I share a little bit of this, I thought I'd share a little bit about the production and the circumstances surrounding the production. So the scene I want to share with you first is of the rabbi having just confronted the emperor, who you can see on the screen here. The emperor says, "Haven't I done enough for you people?" And the rabbi doesn't feel like he has done enough. So here you'll see our rabbi debating what he should do next and coming to the decision that he needs to take this drastic action. The appeal of this story for me, aside from just kind of the fantastical nature of it, was that it actually hits a bunch of what I would call contemporary themes. Themes of differing truths, of othering, of sort of confirmation bias that we're all potentially guilty of, and even things like our engagement with technology or artificial intelligence. The golem is a kind of created intelligence, and whether it has a soul, whether it has rights, whether it has self-control, all of those things emerge in this. So I was intrigued by how this ancient tale feels so relevant. As I was working on this, Tony Offerly and I would frequently talk about how weirdly contemporary, something would happen in the news and it would remind us of this opera. I also wanted to mention that the text, the libretto, is from my dear friend Sid Homan, who's on the English faculty at UF and is a sort of surrogate grandparent for my children. I've loved Sid for many decades now. The way that came about is I'd come up with this idea. I ran a plot by him and said, "Sid, do you think this will work on the stage?" He gave me some great suggestions. And then I asked him if he'd be willing to put the libretto together, and he jumped on it. As he said, he was a kid from the tough parts of Philly and fell in love with opera and was hiding in his closet listening to opera when the other kids were playing stickball. So this was a dream come true for him. Let me share this scene with you. This is our rabbi debating his actions and coming to a conclusion.
Satisfied, just as peace, oh, not from him, not from him, not from the Christians. We Jews must seek protection elsewhere, at any cost, at any cost. I tried to appeal to him and failed. His promise is empty. Rabbi, teacher, I must take things into my own hands. At any cost, forgive me, my God, but I will find a way. I will, by force. Our violence indeed must be. I must protect my people, your people, at any cost. Who can protect us? The Golem day that was just a wild idea, but now the situation has changed. I've changed. The golem, that creature born from inanimate matter, from clay or mud or child of the four elements, the child of an angry God, who soon becomes a man, soon becomes a powerful than any man, soon becomes the last hope of a desperate people for protection, for justice, for revenge. But at what cost? Devorah warns against resorting to the violence I would now embrace. Do I dare try such magic? If only I knew it was God's will. I am a man of peace, a dove, a good man, a kind man. I used to fear the hawk inside me, but now I welcome this power, creating a golem to save my people. If I could only return to those simpler days with her, when there was just the two of us. Those nights by the fire when the world seemed to melt away, there by the fire, arms around each other and beyond us. Nothing but dreams fade. This is now my new world, God. Grant me to know what is right, to do what is right. matter, the cost.
And I want to quickly then show you the end of when the golem is being brought to life. This is that same rabbi, obviously, and his two assistants, a student and his son-in-law, helping him.
Eternal God, God of our fathers, God of the universe, he who brings forth life from the inanimate earth, give life to this creature of clay, so that he may be the sacred deliverer of your people. Now join with me in the prayer of creation. Breathe into his nostrils the breath of life, and then became a living soul. With these consonants, with these vowels, we invoke the name that is the essence of God. His power guarded by letters and hidden syllables. O God of our fathers, let my hand write permanent truth on this forehead of this lifeless creature. Life so that we may live, make him your strong right hand to save your people Israel. Hold my hand now as I raise him from the dead, this powerful reminder of your own handiwork in creating Adam, the first man. This creature from this strength will serve and guard and protect us, and if need be, take revenge on our enemies.
Father, Father, I was in darkness, and now by your so potent art I am raised from the dead. Given me life, Father, Father. Where am I? What am I? And how will I serve you? Father! Father!
So I can't talk about this without also talking about the production values of what you're watching here. This piece was completed in 2019 with a scheduled premiere at the Hippodrome State Theater in March of 2020. You may remember that month. So we were in Tech Week, about to move everything over to the Hippodrome and launch this thing when we had to shut everything down, as everybody did with everything. The initial idea was that we would postpone the production, but when it became obvious that we were going to be shut down for a while, the students who had learned this piece, many of them were graduating, and we needed to kind of capitalize on their efforts before they went hither and yon into the next phase of their lives. So a plan was hatched in conjunction with James Oliverio, who you met several weeks ago in this course, who runs the Digital Worlds Institute, to rethink this and to film the piece and produce it as a filmed opera. And we had to do so under some pretty bizarre conditions. With COVID raging, and this is before the vaccines, we obviously, safety was the primary consideration. So what we came up with was this idea that we would get the orchestra together. It's a 15-piece orchestra, and we had them spaced out with microphones in a gargantuan hall. We got all the orchestral parts recorded, And then we took the singers one at a time into the recording studio at WUFT Studios, the radio station, where Dana Hill, who I'm sure whose voice you've heard, the classical music host, graciously served as our recording engineer for the vocal parts. I developed a whole new skill set as lead recording engineer and editor, sound editor for this, which was a big learning curve and a useful kind of experience ultimately. We assembled all of the sound files together, and then the performers were brought into the Phillips Center, where we had a team filming them, along with some backdrops that were created on the stage. But everything had to be done with strict distancing and no actual singing. As you may recall, singing proved to be one of the more dangerous activities that we could do when you're talking about viral spread. So the singers were all lip syncing. They had to coordinate with hearing their own voices coming back and trying to lip sync along with their what they'd heard, and we had to keep them distanced. Some things were handled through camera angles, but we couldn't get people more than within 6 feet of each other. The piece calls for some crowd scenes, and we had to, use some camera tricks for that. And then the Digital Worlds people, as you saw at the end of that last clip, did some of their video magic to try to fill in some places where, had we been able to do this production as originally intended, we would have used some stage magic, some lighting effects and other special effects that had been planned. So as the production manager said, as we were doing this, we were kind of building the airplane as we were flying it. It was really quite an undertaking, given the circumstances we were operating under. But it was a clever way to salvage what might have been a completely lost opportunity otherwise. My hope is to find a way to bring this to the stage. That was obviously its original intention. What we're currently working on is based on feedback after I know some of you watched the premiere presentation of this filmed version back in the fall, and I appreciate that. We got some feedback from people, including from some of you, that seeing the text would be helpful. So we are in the process of putting the English text in there. It's difficult with sung language sometimes to understand text. So I'm actually learning how to do that part as well. And that should be done soon. We're going to clean up a couple of things with camera shots and some of the sound, and then try to make this publicly available and see about putting this version out there. But primarily, at least from my perspective, it's about sharing the work, but also about trying to interest companies in doing a live production when such things are safe to do again. Again, if there are any questions or comments at any time, I'm happy to entertain them. Yeah, Don.
I find the process absolutely amazing. The question I'm wondering is, or the question I have is, have you given any thought to actually writing this up, telling the story and submitting it to a journal or a professional conference or something of that sort?
About the production itself?
Yes, and the process you all went through given COVID and everything.
Yeah, so my colleague, Tony, our opera director, just did a poster session at the most recent National Opera Association conference to share some of this. There was a documentary, those who watched the premiere may have seen. We had a documentary crew following us from the College of Journalism, and they made a beautiful 15-minute documentary that won an award for student productions, kind of showing what some of this process was like as well. We've learned something from this. We've been talking now about looking into various other collaborative projects like this, because the technology is clearly available for producing opera in new ways and archiving opera in new ways. Had we conceived of this from the beginning as being something made for this medium, we might have had a very different story. We certainly would have had a very different set of sort of visual aesthetics and different production values, but it's intriguing. It's made me want to do more of this. Yeah, it has been fascinating. It's also been fascinating to see people have to wear all sorts of new hats. I do want to credit, as a side note, Marcus Rhodes, the gentleman playing the rabbi. He was not cast in the original production. The person who had learned that role, which is the main role, has moved up to the Northeast somewhere and was heavily involved with a new position and couldn't make it down here. Marcus joined us as a new doctoral student in voice in a brand new doctoral program that we've just started. And he showed up and we said to him, hey, how would you like to learn this incredibly challenging opera role, record it in a studio in 3 weeks, and then a couple of weeks later, memorize the whole thing and be on stage lip syncing? And he said yes, and it was remarkable. It was remarkable to see that kind of energy put forward. And he's got a beautiful voice, as you heard. So why opera, right? Part of what I think I mentioned this when I spoke with you a while back, part of what I see the role of arts as is an opportunity to ask complex questions, not provide answers, but to provide a stimulus for thought, and particularly to try to put an emotional frame or add an emotional layer to complex ideas. As I've heard somebody say, when you read words, you can think a thought, and when you hear music, you can feel a feeling. When you hear sung music, it's this unique opportunity to feel a thought. And I love that. And that's part of what I was aiming for here. So I want to share a couple of other moments from this. I'm trying to be mindful of time too. This is a scene where another invented character, we call her Devorah, she's the pregnant daughter of the rabbi, is expecting her child and living in this world full of violence, and is wondering about what it's like to bring a baby into this world, and what mothers on the other side of this cultural divide feel about their own children.
This precious child inside me, waiting to greet the world. What will my child find? Is it a center? When I myself was a child, I drew a picture for my mother of an egg with a crack in its shell, and a baby bird's head emerging. My mother said, Devorah, tell me the story of this bird. What became of it? And I replied, Mother, the baby bird took one look Life doesn't happen this way. I am that mother now, facing the same harsh world. I wish it were not so. And what I ask myself now is, does a Christian mother, also carrying a child in her, an innocent child, about to give Are we so different? Are we not the same?
I want to share two more fragments with you. In this next, this is where this is where one of the places in the live production we had imagined a large chorus coming in, a crowd scene. And so part of my interest in doing this was not to talk about this particular story on its own or the difficult circumstances of this particular group of people, but try to go from the particular to the universal. And the question in my mind was, given the world we live in and the world that people have always lived in, I suppose, what is it that can trigger a resort to violence? It's not something that I can imagine in my own comfortable life, but I'm not, so naive as to think that I wouldn't, under the right circumstances or the wrong circumstances rather, become a very different person with very different values. So this is the moment where fire is set to the Jewish ghetto, and you'll see the golem's reaction.
at any cost. At any cost. At any cost, we have no choice. At any cost.
So you can't keep that guy around. As I'd mentioned, the rabbi puts him to death. And lest you think that this whole piece, it is dark. It's exploring dark themes and dark ideas and a dark side of human nature. But it also became, for me, a kind of hopefully a long kind of prayer for peace. The piece begins and ends with prayer, and my hope is that some kind of acknowledgement of the facts of human nature prove to be a useful tool in moving all of us forward. So this is the kind of funeral service for the golem. You're going to see Eve, the granddaughter, debate her next actions, and then the finale of the piece.
Exalted and hallowed be his great name. Hallowed be his name. Amen. May his great name be blessed forever and ever. Blessed forever and ever. Amen. May the Holy One bring abundant peace to the world and Israel. Abundant peace for the world and Israel.
Death. Truth.
Blessed art thou, King of the universe, who has created us, sustained us, and allowed us to reach this day. With the washing of our hands, we prepare our bodies and our souls anew for the promise of your gift to your people Israel. Sanctify us with your commandments, and make us willing in all that we do. May we offer your love to people everywhere, as good
Thank you. Thank you for listening. So that's sort of the piece in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. I would love to welcome any questions or comments about this or anything else that's come up during the course of the course.
I think it was an amazing undertaking, Paul. I really enjoyed watching it the first time, and I think this is just one example of some of the positive things that have come out of this crisis we've all been living in for the past 2 or 3 years. And it's just amazing that you were able to put this team together and to pull this off. It just was amazing. That very last scene in the opera is really scary. And I just, I can't, as I told you before, I can't help but wonder what happens next.
Yeah, that's good. If we wrapped it all up with a neat little bow, it wouldn't serve the purpose that I feel like we needed that part of the purposes of this is to be this thought-provoking thing. We'd all like to know what happens next, right? With everything. I appreciate the comments, and I appreciate the comments about the team. I'd like to take credit for that, but it was really some people stepped forward. James Oliverio it said to me, you know, as a composer himself, when he heard that this thing got shut down, his heart went out, and we've been friends for a while, and he felt like he had a way to help. He came forward, and our opera program, the director and the singers in it are among the most optimistic people I've ever met, and to do all this in these circumstances was great. And you're right. There's a lot. Hopefully we always learn from adversity. I know a lot of creative artists, and it's a natural thing to want to shut it down during adverse circumstances, but I think the impulse to try to do something regardless is important. So one of the things that I did, Don was mentioning the background that I have here. You're in my studio here. There's some instruments, a guitar and a bass and a keyboard, and over this way, I haven't cleaned this up. I didn't prepare for this, but there's a piano right there. And you know, as we were all kind of locked in our homes for a while, and I one of the first things I did when I found myself with some creative time, knowing that I'd had several things canceled, not just this, I had a piano concerto in Russia that was supposed to be premiered that was canceled and other things, is I always kind of wanted to experiment with technology a little bit. And I put an album out of what I think sounds to other people like progressive rock versions of some of my music that I've written for orchestra or chamber groups. And it kind of is that. I just thought of it as an electronic rendition of some things that I'd done before where I got to play everything. And that was, and produce the whole thing in my little, 10 by 15 room here. Just because I need to make stuff. I appreciate all the chat comments too. Are there other questions? Don?
Well, speaking on a personal basis, back in 1991, when we started the Digital Worlds Institute and brought James Olveri on the campus, this was the vision, this was the hope, that would become a resource for creative artists across the spectrum and would be there to not only support, but inspire new ways of creating things. Which leads me to my question about that you sort of referenced the artificial intelligence thing where the Golem was concerned. We're in the age of artificial intelligence, and UF has just invested a huge amount of money, not only in a building, but more importantly, perhaps, faculty positions across all the disciplines on campus. Well, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about where you see artificial intelligence interfacing with music in general, with composition. And I think you have a new colleague who couldn't be with us this year, but will be joining us next year. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
I'd love to. Yeah, I find this fascinating and potentially terrifying. There are, I've spent a lot of time just really sort of because of my artistic goals, but just as a human being interested in where we are and where we're going, looking into artificial intelligence. And what the concerning part is what some people call the artificial intelligence alignment problem. That is, when we make machines that are smarter than us, we already have things that are smarter than us by certain measures, but if you get to the point of artificial general intelligence and something is really capable of developing its own kind of motivations, we could potentially really be in trouble. I know that sounds like sort of science fiction-y stuff, but I know there are people deeply interested in that. UF just announced a kind of ethics center related to artificial intelligence, and that's a thing that my colleague, who I'll talk about in a moment, is deeply interested in. From the standpoint of art making, I literally was reading yesterday, just finished reading a dissertation from one of our doctoral students who's defending on Thursday a machine learning program that he has developed as part of his cognate in machine learning, where he's trying to program a computer to do some style mimicry, or to discern rules or behaviors, is probably a better way to put it, or tendencies within a body of music, and then to generate continuations of the music. Most of the results make me not too worried about my job, but these are early days. One of the places that I see this going, the historian Yuval Harari talks about this eloquently, is it is quite conceivable that we will get to a point in not terribly long where some combination of biometric data and personal preference choices will allow computers, or even small handheld devices or watches or whatever, to really kind of customize our musical experiences, personalize and customize. If a computer can sense that you are enjoying something based on some measure of enjoyment, endorphin release or whatever, it's certainly conceivable that computers can push us into a whole new realm of artistic experience, which is fascinating and head scratching and all of that. The optimist in me thinks that maybe some kind of partnership using these tools in a kind of collaborative way might lead us to new avenues of exploration. So when UF started the AI initiative, we were given the opportunity to put faculty hire proposals together, and I jumped on it with my colleagues because there's an obvious interface with music composition. And when I say obvious interface, I mean in the creative act, but also, as you noticed with, at least with Jim Sain and possibly others mentioned, some use of electronics in the composition process. That's been going on for some time. So we put out a proposal and we're able to hire a young composer named Tina Talon, who is a big shot. She just won like as we were hiring her, she won the Rome Prize, which has her spending a year at the American Academy in Rome. She was at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard last year. And has written opinion pieces for the New Yorker and other major news outlets about bias in technology. One of her big sort of breakthroughs is discussing the way that some technology seems to preference people from a certain demographic. Microphones are designed for men, and they tend to make women's voices sound harsh and technically kind of distorted and unappealing in ways that really disadvantage women in certain situations. This was apparently picked up during the 2016 presidential campaign. So what Tina is doing, I just observed her teaching, is using technology as part of her compositional process as an idea generator. If you find that you like a certain direction for music and can balance the kind of predictability and surprise, which is what we're trying to do as composers all the time, with various sort of algorithms, possibilities seem endless. That's sort of where we are. That's a very long-winded answer, but that's it's a big topic, obviously.
I either heard or read somewhere that once artificial intelligence is really with us, that, as you've alluded to, that you can, by plugging in certain information, the machine, if you will, could recreate almost anything, Beethoven, Chopin, you name it. But that's the one aspect of music that where humans have the advantage over the machine is the area of improvisation. You think that's not my statement. I'm just wondering what you think about that notion.
If improvisation is, so the way that, I mean, these machines just don't think the way we do, right? Obviously, and they can beat somebody at chess or Go by kind of a sort of brute force method of just running possibilities over and over until it kind of comes up with something, right, that's workable. It is certainly conceivable that improvisation in the style of Oscar Peterson or Miles Davis is a doable thing by a machine because it will have a model. Whether something can create something truly new that's another story altogether. And part of what I think a composer's role is to try to find something that hasn't been done before. How a computer would find something that hasn't been done before, that is also appealing to a human. We're at least a long ways off from that, I'm sure. I see Richard raised a hand.
I wanted to go back and comment about IT a little bit, because you mentioned that UF is setting up some kind of ethical question facility about IT, because this is IT seems like a black box, and that all means that you have to be careful of the inputs to this particular process. For example, in China, they're using IT to identify facial recognition of every person in China. Now that could be manipulated badly, like the so-called list of enemies that Putin has developed for Crimea and for his adventures that he's just undertaken. So I'm kind of saying it's somewhat like music. There is a person having ideas to go forth. And there's a lot of difference between saying, okay, I'm the creative person here, and I don't have any sinister motives, and I'm a reasonable fellow, but other people could use IT to sway the election to elect Trump, let's say, again. So I'm really stuck with this revelation that I'm afraid we're going to create a lot of heat about ethics in IT, and rightly so. But how does music interface with ethics and IT? I couldn't fathom that, and if you'd like to give me a little comment, I would appreciate it.
Well, sure. I mean, I guess the simple example from my colleague of just talking about sort of bias in various types of technology that we may not be conscious of, that's part of it. I have a tendency to talk out of school already. So, outside my expertise where I can talk comfortably is as a composer. And the part of the reason to circle back to the Golem project, part of the reason that I personally make an analogy to this engagement with a technology was this notion that in this ancient tale, which by the way, is possibly a source for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We don't know that for sure, but that's been posited, and is certainly a source for Goethe's Sorcerer's Apprentice stories. So it's a tale that's had a lot of cultural resonance. The suggestion here seems to be that this thing that we are making may well, as you just suggested, Richard, may well go off in directions that we can't predict or have unintended consequences. And I, of course, don't know the answers. I don't know that any of us do. What I'm hoping to do, and where the arts have a role, is to put the questions forward and put them forward, perhaps, metaphorically, like I'm trying to do here. If it spurs this exact conversation, then mission accomplished. I very much appreciate the question.
Are there other questions from anyone? We still have time. See anyone, Julianne?
Don't see any. There was something in chat, but it says you pulled the golem out of the hat.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, then I'd like to, on behalf of everyone, first of all, thank you all for being part of the class, all of you who participated. And I want to acknowledge Paul Richards, not only as an extremely gifted and dedicated artist teacher who was a fantastic colleague when I had the privilege of being over at UF, but I want you all to know that he helped me and encouraged me in putting this together. It was his embrace of the idea and encouraging his faculty colleagues to participate. And Paul, I just want to thank you so much for this. We've really learned a lot and enjoyed your music in particular. So thank you so very much.
Thank you again. Thank you for listening. It's great to meet everybody.
Thank you,
you all.
Don. Thank you, Don
Thank
and
you all.
Diane. Everything you do is wonderful.
Right, and I want to also thank Diane Haynes for very graciously co-hosting this with me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diane.
All right, we can't wait to see what you have next for us, Don.
Hey.
And Diane, there you are. All right, everyone, stay well.